Hello everyone, I'm Exodia, and today we are doing episode 8 of our Roblox scripting beginner series on Roblox Studio. Today we will be talking about for loops, breaking, and we will be continuing on about tables because I feel like in episode 7 I had a really barren explanation and we only really talked about table.insert and table.remove. Now, the biggest thing that we're going to be covering today is for loops, so this episode might be quite longer than what we've had previously in the series. So yeah, as always, make a brand new base plate inside of Roblox Studio, and make a brand new script inside of Server Script Service. For organization's sake, call the script something so you can keep it organized. I have it called Roblox Scripting Beginner Series Episode 8, as we're on Episode 8 in the series. Now, for loops. Now, there are two different types of for loops. Basically what a for loop is it's a method of looping through a table or looping through code and repeating it multiple times. Now, you have to do this through tables, which, let's return to tables for a bit. As we know, when we cover tables, a table is a list of items. We can compare it to a basket, because inside of your basket, maybe you want to store a lot of fruits, for example. We have a variable for local apple equals 8 apples, local orange equals 7 oranges, local pear equals 12 pears. And then we can make our local fruits table, which we write local, and then the name of our table, which we can call whatever we want, just like with variables. And then we set that equal to some open and close curly brackets. And then we can put the apple, orange, and pear variables inside there, and this will make a list of in this order. So our first item would be apples, second would be orange, and the third would be pear. Now, like I said, you can think of a table as sort of a basket, as you're going to have all of these things stored in them, and you could have a bunch of different stuff. For example, you could have a string value or a decimal value or even an object workspace.baseplate. This would be an array of items, which is a list of items. But yeah, tables are a really important tool, especially when it comes to using for loops, because in our basket we have all these items, and we wanna loop through those items and do something to each item every time we're looping through. Now that's where for loops come in. So we have our table, and then we have for loops. Now, as I said earlier, there are two different types of for loops. For I, v in pairs, and then our table, do, as well as for I equals starting number, end number, increment, do. I'm going to talk about this for loop first because I have a great analogy, or I have a great way to remember this type of for loop, because for loops are very overwhelming when you first learn about them. I remember when I first learned about for loops, I thought I would never be able to remember them or learn them, but we will hopefully help you. I can hopefully help you guys here. So with for loops, how I learned them with for I equals the three numbers and the do is your first number is always going to be a starting number. This is going to be the number you want to start on your loop. So if we start at 0, we can start at 0, 1, 2. Here we'll start at 0. 10 is going to be our end number. So basically, this will be the max number of loops we go through. And then the third number will be our increment. Start and increment. The increment is how much we want to increase the starting value by after each loop. So in this case, we'll increase it by 1. Now, to show you, we could print I, which I will be equal to that starting number in your for loop. Then we could do a wait 1. Using this for loop is a great way to do a timer, but right now we will show you that the code will be looped through every second, and it'll print the index, which is what this I stands for. Now, with these loops, they're really useful for, like I said, making timers. Also, One thing is that, remember when we learned back, if you watch the functions video where we made our function, local function, my function, and you had your code print number that I made, we'll just have that for example. If you wanted to, say you wanted to run the code inside of your function multiple times, well, the only way to call a function would be to call it like so. You'd have to just write the function name with open close parentheses. And if you want to call the function multiple times, you'd have to write it multiple times. And it would get messy because you'd just be doing this, which isn't very clean for your code. However, what for loops allow you to do is with this particular for loop, we can print I here, or actually we'll print number, we'll do I, print the current loop number is, and then we will concatenate the I, and then instead of printing I here, we can call the function, and thankfully we'll only have to write it once, because what's going to happen is if we test this right now, the for loop is going to repeat the code, and you'll see, I spelled the wrong, but you'll see it increments the I, and it's printing the number, the loop number is 7, 8, 9, 10. So these for loops are really useful for making timers and repeating code rather than having to constantly like repeat calling the function. You could just put the function here with your index as your parameter if you wanted to, for the sake of this example. And then it'll constantly repeat this code and increment it as so with the loop. Now, then here comes the other loop, which is for I, v in pairs. This loop will be more important for if you want to loop through a table. So let's say we're looping through all the players and we want to maybe add cash to them because it's the end of the round or of a round-based game, and they maybe it was like a wave defense and they beat the wave, so we want to give everybody in the wave everybody in the game some cash, so we can loop through the players here. We'd of course have to make another loop, and we'd have to get the player service, which would be game:get service players, and then we'd have to get the players, which how we do that would be local player list equals player service :get players. Now this is basically game:get service players. What get service allows you to do is it allows you to get all the services inside of Roblox Studio, that could be the workspace, the player's lighting, all the things just undisplayed on the right here. And there's a bunch of other stuff like the context action service and stuff like user input service. User input service would allow you to bind actions. Say you wanted to open a menu with a button, you could use that. That'll be in our advanced series where we cover that. However, for now, we'll just get the players here. And so we have a table of all of our players. So let's replace this first table with our player list. And then, so how this works is this I is going to stand for index. This is going to be the number of the player number we're going to be on. Say we have 5 players in our game and we want to add cash to them. Then if this index, if we're doing our first loop, it'll keep track of the first player, then it goes up to the second player. This would be the second value. This would be 2 when we're on our second loop through, then 3 for our third player, 4 for our fourth, and 5th for our final player. And then V would be the item inside of the table. So in that case, that would be our player that we're adding our value to. So we'll do like V, and how we do this is we do V dot, and say we had a cash value inside of our player, we do V dot cash dot value plus equals our reward amount. So of course we don't have the cash value in the player. We need to make a separate script for our leader stats and leaderboard stuff, which that'll probably be our first tutorial in the advanced series. Just going over how to make a player leader stats leaderboard, which you usually will see in the top right of your game, it'll display, especially in simulators, will display like your strength and stuff like that. We'll show you that in the advanced series. But yeah, for loops are very like, and of course you could use these any table you want to loop through. Actually, say you want to loop through a table of parts and you want to change their color, that's also another thing you can do. That's not as applicable because it won't, when you get higher up into the more advanced stuff, because for loops are definitely going to be something that you are going to guaranteed use in a good quality game on Roblox. If you want your game to make on the front page and you want to have some complex systems, you're going to at least encounter a need for loops once, depending on the game you're making. So that's why it's very vital that we learn these topics and understand them. And honestly, my best advice would be repetition, especially for things like for loops. Now, like I said, the for I v in pairs loop, and then your table. So in this case, we could also do player list here, like we did, or even if we don't get the player list, we could do player service : get players. Or if we want to loop through a folder, or in this case, we could do workspace. We could do workspace : get children, and this will loop through all the children of the workspace. So here it would be the camera, the terrain, and the base plate. And then let's actually change if, and this is how we're going to detect if it's a part, because this is something that we could do as an example right here. We're going to change the name of this base plate using this for loop. So we're going to detect if v : now this is how you detect if something is a part. I will go more in depth in this in an advanced series video, but v : is an open close parenthesis, and this will do part or any object item that you, or class item that you want the check to see if v is. If v is a part, then we'll know in our workspace when we loop through that, well, the base plate's the only part in here, so we'll change the name v.name equals, and we'll set it as a string part. Else, if v else, actually, we don't need to write an else if statement, which an else if statement can be used just to check another condition. So if we're doing else, we want to check maybe if it's a camera, for example, right here, then we could do else if v : is a camera. Then that would index, of course, or indent. But here we are just writing else v, or else we could print not a part, the item name wasn't changed. So if we test this here, we can see that if we look inside of workspace, our base plate was changed to part, the name of it. And then we have our loop. In fact, let's use some examples. We already did one small example with this for loop. Let's make a timer with this for loop. So for I equals. So let's change our starting value, which will be the first value. The first value will always be your start. Let's change this to 30. Let's do a 30-second timer. Change this to 0. The middle number will always be your ending value. So the first number will be what number your loop starts on. And then the middle number will always be the number your loop ends on. And then the increment, we'll change that to -1. The increment that we have is -1 will always be the value we subtract from the starting number after each loop. So we'll wait 1 because we want to make a timer that triggers every second. And then we can write an if statement with the condition if I is less than or equal to 0, then print time is up, and also after each thing we'll print I. So you can see we have a timer starting, and actually we'll so we don't have to wait long, we'll set this to a small timer. So let's just do 5 seconds just to show you that how the loop will work and how the timer can work. And then, as you can see, our time was up and it printed out because of our if statement. Now that we're a bit more familiar with all 3 loops, the while loop and the 2 for loops, there's a thing you can do with for loops, kind of like with our functions, where we could return a value. With all of our loops, not just for loops, with all of our loops, there's something called break. And what break allows us to do is it could basically cut off the loop and we will be out of the loop. So the loop will no longer run. So in this case, let's set this to 30, and then we're gonna make I less than or equal to 15. So when we're halfway through, we will print 15 seconds. 15 seconds have passed, and then we will write break. Now, like I said, when you write break inside of your loop, it'll basically cut off the loop there and it'll end. Now, if we write an else if statement, if I is less than or equal to 0, then print all time was depleted. Now we're going to find that our timer is going to get to 15, whereas it's not going to go any lower than that because our loop is going to break out of it. So as you can see, the loop stops because we have the break right there. Now, if we want to, let's insert some more parts inside of our workspace. We'll call these some random names like my part. You can call these whatever because the plan is we're either going to change their name to part or we're not going to change it at all. So actually, you know what? Yeah, let's add a bunch of parts. My part 2, and one thing that you can do is you can press Control D and that'll duplicate your item. And so let's keep duplicating. Otherwise, if you don't use the shortcut, you could just right click and then all these will pop up. So you can copy the part, paste it somewhere, you can cut it, you can delete it, rename it, group it. What grouping will do is it'll put it inside of a model, which the shortcut for that is Control G. So model. You could also insert parts inside of there as a child of it. You could do a lot of stuff with that. So we'll just add, we'll do 7 parts. If A is a, so we're going to loop through, we're going to use this for IV and pairs loop, and we're going to loop through to see if it's part, and if v.name equals base plate. And then we'll change the part, we'll change the name of the part, and then we will break out of the loop. And then we'll also print v.name, and so yeah. So as you can see, we got to 1 part before our base plate was reached to rename it. That part's name was not changed, and then on the second loop through, we had our base plate pop up. And when we were checking on our second loop through of a part, we had our base plate pop up. So we changed the name of it, we printed the name of it, and then we broke out of the loop, so the loop no longer continued. Now, this is all, I can understand if this is all hard to grasp, because for loops are by no means easy when you're learning them for the first time. So like I said, repetition, repetition, repetition is key. When I first learned about them, I was very, very, very intimidated by them. And it's really important to have a good knowledge of tables, so in my pinned comment that I always have in my video, I will have the Roblox API for loops, as well as at least 1 or 2 good resources for tables linked into there. So you can, if you dedicate the extra time to check them out, to learn more about them. But yeah, the for loops are going to be a pretty good thing to use in your game. In fact, I really want you guys to understand them, so I'm actually going to go through one more example with our fruits table, and we're going to change the orange value to 5. So because I haven't done as many examples with for I, v in pairs, because in my opinion, and we'll put fruits inside of our pairs. In my opinion, for I equals start and increment do. And we always have to separate these by a comma, otherwise you'll get an error in your script. This is a lot easier to grasp on the for loop side because you have your starting value, your end value, and then your increment value. So you control how the loop's going to work. You control where it starts, you control where it ends, and you control how much the loop increases on each run through of your code. And it also allows you to repeat lines of code without having to constantly rewrite them. Like say we just wanted to print I, we won't have to go through and print 1, print 2, etc., etc. It makes your code a lot cleaner, it's a lot more efficient. And it's also a lot easier to understand in my opinion. However, once again, if there are any comments regarding this for loop, let me know in the comments as I will tend to them, as I really want you guys to understand for loops of all things, as they're one of the last beginner topics, and they are definitely a vital part of making your game. But back to our example with for IV in pairs using our fruits loop. So what we're doing here is, as you know, we have our 8 apples, 5 oranges, and 12 pears inside of our basket, or our table. And so we're going to loop through the table, and we're going to check if v is greater than 5, then print we have at least, actually we'll make this 6. We'll make this greater than 6. We have more than half a dozen of, and then we'll concatenate and do v dot. Actually, I don't think that would work. I think that would just return the number of a, we'll just write of a fruit. If we wanted to, actually I think we could do apple, no, We'll just go with this. Okay. So we have more than half a dozen of a fruit. And then else if v is less than 6, then we will print there is less than half a dozen of a fruit. And so what should happen is, because this for loop is going to loop through each item in the table, the apple will be the first value of I, or when it equals 1, because it's the first item inside of the table. The orange will be the second value of I when I equals 2, because it's the second item in the table, and pear should be the third value of I, and the final value of I, because it's the third item in the table. And so v should be getting the value of each. Then what we're doing is we are checking to make sure that v is greater than 6, and if so, we'll print we have more than half a dozen of the fruit. Else if v is less than 6, then we'll print there's less than half a dozen of the fruit. And if we test this, we will see that we have more than half of a dozen fruit printed twice. And I believe that the reason we didn't get this printed, there's less than half a dozen of fruit, is because we forgot to set it to less than or equal to. So that way we're checking to make sure if it's less than or equal to 6. Otherwise, that 6 will not be accounted for. So yes, as we could see, it was even in that order: apple, orange, pear, and then more or less more, because more or less more. more than half a dozen, less than or equal to half a dozen, more than half a dozen. I probably could have worded that better, but yeah, these are for loops. They heavily utilize tables to their max, well, not to their max, but they definitely utilize tables to a larger degree to make some cool stuff in your game. So other things that we can do with for loops, specifically this for loop, this is apart from making timers and stuff in your game, so you have a round-based game and you want to make a timer with the other for loop, where this for loop will shine most is when you're doing stuff like, for example, making a tower defense game, when you are trying to find what tower you have to place based on your hotbar. You'll click on your tower button, and then you'll maybe have a value inside of that button that has the name of the tower stored. Then you'll loop through your folder of towers, likely inside replicated storage, and find a tower of that name that matches the one inside your button. And then you'll find that tower, and then you'll start like your placement system. And then you'll loop through once again when you're placing it down to make sure it's placed on the server side of things. That's just one example of many for using for loops that we did not cover. For loops are one of the most useful tools, so once again, I cannot stress this enough. Please, please, please leave comments if you need help with these, because they are a very important thing that you will learn about in Roblox scripting. I will link at least one resource to help you, and the bare minimum I will do will be linking the Roblox API. So yeah, that's all there is. If this tutorial was helpful, please like and subscribe. Also ring that bell because I post these videos on Wednesdays and Sundays, and I'm thinking of doing some mini-series, and then I will post those on Friday if I do have a tutorial series going on. Otherwise, that'll take place of the Wednesday and Sunday upload. Anyways, otherwise, if you need any help, please leave it in the comments. And that'll be all that we have today for loops. So yeah, see ya.